All right, so ladies and gentlemen, yesterday you saw a video about points, lines, and planes. And today we can do the official notes. This is the section 1.1, basic geometry terms. As you can see, this is so that you can double check your warm-up, see if you got the right answers and the work that's involved for it. But this video is meant more for the notes, and so we're going to get started with the notes right away. So it says undefined terms versus defined terms. So the first fill in the blank says a point has no, well, remember, a point is literally physically just a dot. I mean, look at this one right here, right? In fact, how it's said is if we read this, if we see this in a geometry class, we would just say, hey, that's point K. How it's written, it's really just the letter K. If you see a capital letter in geometry, it just means, oh, they must be talking about a single point. We also tend to write PT for short, point K for it. And so to fill this part out, it says a point has no dimension. Meaning it's not like I can take a ruler and measure how long it is, right? Or how wide it is. It's literally just a dot, a point is what we're looking at. Now, when we're looking at our next word, it says a line. A line extends in blank dimension. Well, in this case, when you look at a line, notice how it goes forever in one direction this way, but this in one direction here. So that's why a line is considered to be going in one dimension. And so how we read this, notice how it has a lot of different points. We can call this line DE. All you have to do is name any 2 points that your line hits. It could also be called line DF. We can call it line EF, FE, so it's as long as we name 2 points. But whenever they use this cursive letter here, we could literally also call it line N for short. But remember, it's kind of like that cursive lowercase letter. But for short, there's a way in geometry, that's too much writing. In math, we like to write it a little bit shorter. And so whenever we talk about a line, notice how it has 2 arrows because it went through the points. Then that just means here's DE. So it put 2 arrows on it because it goes through the point D and it goes through the point E. To call it line DF, same line, I would call it DF, but with 2 arrows on it. And so there's a lot of different options. Now, if I'm going to use that single letter, you cannot use that double arrow with a single lowercase letter. Only for 2 capital letters there. Now, when we look at a plane, now the thing about a plane is basically a flat surface. So just as you saw in the video yesterday, my paper here is a plane. Flat surface. I can actually measure the length, the width, right? We can do that to this paper. And so that's why a plane extends in 2 dimensions. So when we're looking at this picture, like we saw in the video, a plane, all you really need to do, remember, a point, we use a single letter. A line, we use 2 letters. So a plane, we just have to name the 3 points that are on that flat surface. So in this case, there's an R, a W, and a T. So I can call it plane RWT. Notice using capital letters. But then there is this lowercase letter right in the corner. Notice it's not a point. So we can also call that plane M, lowercase. It's the only time we can use a single letter. And now the shortcut, right? We said, all right, well, how do we write it so that we don't have to write a lot? Unfortunately, there is no shortcut. We're going to call it plain RWT. Really no way of cutting it short for that one. All right, so next vocab word, collinear. Obviously, if you look at it carefully, the word line is in the word collinear, of course. So collinear points are points that lie on the same line. And so if you look at this picture, there's 4 points here, but there's only 3 of them that are considered to be collinear. So points I, comma, J, comma, K. Notice how I had to separate them because I'm listing points. So points I, J, K are collinear because they're on the same line. They're all connected by the same line. L is the only one that's kind of off this line, so it can't be used here. Not for collinear. Now, coplanar, notice it kind of has the word plane in it as well. And so if you're looking at coplanar points, are points that lie, well, if this one said collinear, they're on the same line, coplanar just means they're on the same plane. And so if we're looking at this picture here, you see we see these three dots, J. E is where the line goes through it, but it does touch the plane. And there's point P. So these 3 points are said to be coplanar. So points J, comma E, comma P are coplanar. Now, if I were to throw an extra random point in there, for instance, if it's on this line, but it's way over here, the line that's going through it, that point would not be coplanar because it's not laying on that flat surface that's in the picture. All right, 2 more vocab words on this page. So now it says a line segment. A line segment is a part of a line. So very important there, if you have your highlighter, highlight. That consists of 2 points called endpoints and all the points between them. So if you notice, this one is a line segment because it starts at A, it ends at B, but notice it doesn't go through the letter B, it doesn't go through the letter A. A line does. An official line has to have 2 arrows. If it ends at A and at B, this is what we call a line segment. And again, the way it's said is this is line segment AB. Or you could say line segment BA, as long as you list the 2 endpoints. But again, remember, this one does have a shortcut because there's too much writing. So I'm going to list, remember there's 2 letters. For a line, you only need 2 letters, just like we saw above. So we're going to put the 2 letters again. But because it's a line segment, remember earlier we put a line with 2 little arrows? Well, here's that line, but remember, it doesn't go through the points, so no arrows this time. The other option is, of course, to call it BA with no arrows. Keep that in mind. And then finally, array. Array is a part of a line that consists of 1 endpoint and all the points of the line on one side of the endpoint. So the idea is this, and it does say opposite rays share an endpoint and form a line. Here's what they're trying to say. Array basically has an endpoint, so let's say this is the endpoint, and then it goes on forever and ever and ever and ever in only one direction. A line segment stopped on both. A line goes forever and ever on both sides. Array only goes forever and ever in one direction. So in this case, this one I could give it a few different names. For instance, I could call it ray by. Notice I started with the endpoint, that's the B, and then I said it goes through the letter Y. So it went through the letter Y, the Y is at the end. Or I could have called it ray BN. Notice I'm listing the endpoint first. The endpoint goes first, and then this is the one that it goes through. So notice I just have to name 2 letters again. Endpoint first, and then any other letter that it goes through. But you just have to be careful when you write it as a shortcut. So if you notice, if I say BY, the endpoint was the B, but it went through the letter Y. So we're going to put the arrow over the letter Y in this case. Only one arrow though. Remember, it only goes forever in one direction. Or we could have called it, remember how we said BN? Now, let me show you something. If I were to switch the letters around, then that means that I would draw my line segment on top. But the question is, who would get the arrow, right? Well, remember, B is the endpoint. It cannot get an arrow. But it did go through the letter N, so we would put the arrow in this direction. So, yeah, you could put the letters in whatever order you want, but you have to be careful as to who gets that arrowhead. Now, continuing with the notes, it's kind of a long set of notes here. So we have a couple questions here that you should answer for yourself. So the very first one, it says, explain why AB segment, and see that's why we have to learn the vocab here. Explain why segment AB and segment BA are exactly the same. Use words and diagrams. Well, we should draw it first. Here's A. There's B. See, endpoints, no arrows. Then it says BA. All right, well, if I draw that one, there's a B. There's an A. Notice no arrows because they said it was a line segment. They didn't put arrows there. So the question is, why is it that they're the same? Well, they are line segments. With the same endpoints. Simple enough. Now here I know it didn't come out too well, but what we're supposed to see here is this has an arrow and this has an arrow. So now that we can see it a little bit better, it says explain why ray AB and ray BA are different. Use words and diagrams. Well, look, let's draw that first one. Notice A is the endpoint. And yes, B is another point, but remember it has to go through the letter B. Never put the letter under the arrow. It has to go with a point. And so in this case, A is the endpoint. But when I draw BA, well, let's see. There's my 2 points. There's the B, there's the A. But notice, B is an endpoint and it goes through the letter A. So if you notice the difference, here A is the endpoint. The endpoint here is the letter B. And that's the difference, right? That's what makes it different from each other.